You'll have to go online to see this stuff. Here's a few pages from strings. Violins are actually a nice yellow-green, not like olive, like that. And you notice that it changes if you play on the fingerboard or you play with a mute or natural harmonics. It all changes. It's a pretty complete system. Violas go into greens with the same changes. Cellos are greener, and you know, double basses go into deep blue, and you can't see it. So, yeah.
How did you pick all the features of the sounds of violins? Did you do this from a one? Were you studying yourself one certain score, or were you?
Well, I was working with this composer. We were playing instruments. We were thinking. And a lot of it comes through me. It's like I'm choosing the metaphor. I'm creating the system. There is no absolute, but it really revolves upon my sense of logic, how color works. We were talking it out. So it's not an absolute scientific system, but if you learn the system, it's a language. And so that's a really important part. I mean, when I'm visualizing music, I shift images to pitch changes, for instance. Now, how much would a whole step shift? That's an arbitrary decision. I would shift it an inch, and I would shift a half step, a half inch. But you'll see that later on. So all of the original values I've created, I've decided this is my world, this is my visualization world. It's not based on, I tried to find, you know, colors, if color vibrations would be equivalent to sound vibrations. I could have used that, but they're not. If synesthetes, I always wish I was, this came up with Sunny, I always wanted to be a synesthete, but I have that brain dysfunction. And furthermore, all the synesthetes I've ever looked at, Scriabin, Messiaen, all these people, they disagree on what color is what, it's really unfortunate. So I couldn't use that either. So I came up with these other systems that were based on structure.
No, I like the way that you assigned color to these. I think I was interested in the actual features for your violins and your hue ranges. Hue?
Yeah, hue is good.
Hue ranges for your different features of violin being mixed with each other.
And I worked with this composer. You know, we played it, we thought about it, what's happening in the sound, how can I come up with a reasonable, you know, equivalent metaphor for that in a color system. That's how it works.
It seems like it almost be an infinite system of features where a violin can be mixed in varying degrees with a finite number of instruments.
You're right.
So, okay.
Yeah, that's how it goes. So those are the three color systems very quickly. Now I've also used, I always use landscape and architectural images to visualize aspects of music. It gives me a whole range of ways of thinking about things. And with the Bruckner work, Anton Bruckner is a 19th century symphonist. I don't know, how many of you know who he is, Anton Bruckner? That's pretty good. Okay, and so he has very romantic chromatic harmony, very similar to Wagner's. However, he was a master on the organ, and he has extraordinary counterpoint composed into his symphonies. And he was raised on Baroque music, and he was born near St. Florian's, which is a Baroque monastery in Linz, Austria. He played the organ there. He's buried under the organ. He's still there. I visited him many times. They call him Tony in the Bruckner Institute. So anyway, I decided for the romantic part of his music, my metaphor would be alpine landscapes. And for the counterpoint, heavily structured, I was going to use St. Florian's because it's Baroque and he has so much of his own personal history. And the whole monastery unfolded as different parts of it were the appropriate places for different movements. So the beginning, the first movement, this is the outside of the church. And in combination with these alpine landscapes, and you can see this online too. This is the actual music. This shows where the landscape, where the architecture is going to be, and these are two landscapes that are going to intersperse. And it's really I mean, there's a whole essay which Sunny read, I can't believe it, which explains the whole harmonic, the whole analysis and how it translates, and you can go into that further. And here it shows you the St. Florians, the part of St. Florians that got painted, and first landscape, second landscape, and here it is in the painting. You can see the two landscapes are trailing between each other, and here the theme is going da-da, ba-da, da-da, 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 and so forth. So, second theme goes up the church, and there's the landscapes, there's the painting. I'm just going to run through all these really fast. The third theme goes across from the first movement. You have this entrance into the monastery, and stairs by Jacob Prontauer, and there it is with the landscape. It really makes me ill. I don't know if any of you can see these, but okay. The scherzo is the second movement, and I walked into the courtyard, and these stairs have the same rhythmic value of the scherzo. And the trio, okay, and there's the landscape, there's the painting. The trio is inside the two fast sections of the scherzo. So I went into the stairs, photographed the stairs. Those stairs are inside the outside, and there it is with its landscape. There's the painting, and then the scherzo repeats the fast section. So I've got the same stairs I did before, but they start off they start off pianissimo and go much louder, so I use the perspective. There are kinds of games in here. I don't have time to really go by, but the images fracture to the melodies. Sometimes you'll see solid colors in there, which are another aspect of the orchestral score, but all of it's there. It's all present in these paintings. Yeah, there's that last painting. And the adagio takes place inside the church, which seemed quite appropriate. Slower, more solemn space. So that's pointing up to the ceiling with landscapes. The adagio actually has only two themes, but the first theme has a rest, so the two paintings they were hung with a certain amount of space between them. So that's the first half of the first theme, and this is looking straight up at the ceiling of the church for the second half of the first theme, and with and there's the painting. And the second theme is still inside the church, and two of the same landscapes but painted in different colors, and there's the painting. And the finale is in the inside and outside of the Hall of Mirrors here, which has the same rhythmic components as the music. It's really interesting how architecture and music can come together. So that's inside and that's outside, and they get interspersed together in this. There's the landscape, and there's the painting, and the second theme from the finale is a little counterpoint theme. So this is all inside that Hall of Mirrors, and it sort of scrunches together and goes apart for this lovely counterpoint section. And you can see all of these changes in scale are all dependent on changes of dynamics in the music. It's all mathematically worked out. But once again, it's my quirky little system. And no landscape in this painting. And there's the painting, looking terrible. This one, because the last painting was all architecture, the last part of the finale is all landscape. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so in about 1998, 99, I started working for the Cave Automatic Virtual Environment. And that I didn't really go into doing work digitally in a computer until I had a need to. because I really like handmade work. I like things coming through my body. And all the, yes, you have a, yeah.
One on technique and one on concept.
Uh-huh.
Technique is, and I'm really stupid about this stuff, but when you do those interspersed, that's oil on fiberglass.
Fiberglass, yeah.
Do you paint them in strips, or do you paint them one and then cut the thing?
No. I put them, I pre-cut them. I'd put them up on the wall and paint them. But they would be, remember those drawings that had the black and white?
Yeah. Right.
That was the fracturing pattern. That's how the strips were placed up and down the wall. And they were done in an inversion of the melodic line.
Yeah.
Because then I would rehang them, I would glue them into a rectangle so they would reverse what
But
was
do you
hiding.
paint the whole landscape first? And then
No, first I cut everything up.
How can you keep track of the painting as you go from strip to strip to
Because they're all numbered and they're all, I make all those, I have a whole set of drawings. There's like, I think there's like 6 or 7 drawings, which are my scores. So I would cut up the fiberglass exactly as I needed it and put it up on the wall, you know, with like fun tack stuff, and just paint on it. Then take them down and put them in their proper order after they were, first I would glaze them and then I would, it's quite a long process.
Yeah.
Well, it took me 10 years to do the whole
I can
symphony,
see
okay?
why. The second question I have is, do you consider time from left to right?
Yes, in Western music. That's a really good question. Thank you.
'Cause that's
I
what
mean,
we're
because I don't
showing.
have time to go through everything here today, so I'm leaving a lot out.
But that was
Yeah,
obvious, and I was wondering if that's what you consider.
yes. Time is left to right, and I decide like a whole is a certain amount within a certain amount of space. So a half note will be half of that. Once again, I decide on how much. And I do left to right because this is all Western music.
Okay.
You know, if I were working, yes.
You change your whole note as the timing changes, like if the metronome,
Yeah.
if the metronome says
Yeah.
speed up, your whole note gets shorter.
Yeah, exactly.
Good.
It's just as you would do. Time equals space. Why does time equal space? Because in music, time is the syntax. If you were to hear every note at the same moment, you wouldn't have that piece of music. Well, in visual art, in visualization, it's the same thing for space. If you made every mark in the same spot, you'd lose your syntax. You'd have nothing. So that's why time equals space. Yeah.
I wonder if we took a clustering algorithm or a declustering algorithm, if we could reverse engineer and come up with your components. And
I've always wondered that. I've always wondered that. Somebody will do it eventually, I'm sure. I've had psychologists who want to.
There's a guy actually.
It's very word fun to me, do that now.
He wrote the Mona Lisa in pixels. And I think he scattered the Mona Lisa and tried to recluster the pixels. And actually, I think it wasn't pixels, it was slices. He did slices across.
Did it work?
Yeah, he got really, really close. It was one of the coolest.
If he wants to work with my stuff, I'll let him.
Okay.
I'd be really interested to see, you know, how well that. I assume it will because I'm really quite meticulous in my analysis.
It
And
would
I'm not
be great
even going
to go
into-
back to the music too.
Huh?
It would be great to take it and go back to try to go back to the music.
Yeah.
yeah, as long as we have the truth, figure out how our algo, how, you know. what
And
we
I'm
have to-
working, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
working from the scores. I'm
Yeah.
not working from hearing the music.
Yeah.
I mean, to be quite honest to you, I was listening to country western the entire time.
Oh, you
So I wonder if we
ruined
can
it
pick
for
that
me.
out. I wonder if you have more
No,
color shading.
I know, and when I lived in Germany, I was told, don't ever tell Germans that, but this guy who bought my painting, very German, and I said, he came up to my studio and goes, oh, Amy, you hair this now. No, you're not supposed to see that. And I went to his house to make a repair on the painting, and it was, he comes home, you know, in Cologne, drinks tequila, puts his feet up on the couch, looks at my painting, listening to country western music. And
Country
so-
western is huge in Germany. You should listen to Austrian country western audience.
And I think it's American opera, by the way. So don't put it down.
I suspect that if we did convert your painting to music, we'd find 12-bar blues hidden in there somewhere.
All right, I'll take that as a compliment.
Woven into it is your cheating heart.
That's right.
Okay, so in the virtual color organ, working with that guy, Derry John, I mean, that piece of music, Quanta and Hymn to Matter, was based on a poem by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. about, he was a geologist and a Jesuit. And so, he has this poem, Harsh Matter, how hard it is for man to live. And that was transformed into this man's music. So I came up with, all right, desert images, real ones from Borrego Springs near San Diego. I think we have people from San Diego. Also Arizona. And I found landscapes that are metaphors for different families of instruments, because I'm working with timbre-based, remember? So, but real instruments. So, anyway, these will look better because they're not really color; it's pencil. So this is in Arizona. Oops, that's the wrong thing. Don't read that. I've got to change that. Anyway, that's actually called Beating Objects. It is in Arizona, and it's a petroglyph garden. So to me, this was standing for anything like drums, triangles. You see where all those, carved images by the Native Americans are. So for me, I wanted to like sit there and hit that. So that stands for percussion that you can beat on, that doesn't have like a piano, which has graduated keys. I have another instrument for that. This one is brass, and this is Borrego Springs. And the landscape is called wind tunnels, and it was created by sand-encrusted wind. So, it sort of has like, those holes and the smoothness of the brass instrument. So you see how my little perverted mind works. This one is glass. Derry John had, he'd hit glass chamber bowls and all kinds of he had a very expanded percussion department. So the rock structures there are very sharp, and they seemed very glass-like, and that's east of LA. This is piano, and it's in Borrego Springs, and the pattern of erosion really gives you the feeling of keys, like marimba, glockenspiel, etc. This one is called Sandpaper, and I basically just took a picture as the sun was going down of the desert rock floors. And, these drawings are pretty big. They're like 5 feet by 3 feet. And they often come from quite a few photographs. And they're really drawn specifically, accurately. Those are really the rocks. And that is because he would hit rocks together, sandpaper blocks. And it's a great texture map in the whole virtual environment, too. And this one is Strings, Borrego Springs, standing on Fonts Point. And it's strings because I imagine as you're playing a violin or a cello, the pattern of the bow over the string always creates these kind of mountainous scenes. And it's interesting because in Santa Fe, we have the founders of the kitchen in New York, Stana and Woody Fasulka. And Stana is a violinist, and they're very high-tech artists, and she's doing videos of herself, over exactly the same patterns. She totally agreed with the image as strings. And this is vocals from Arizona because it looks either like a choir or like vocal cords. So you see how the metaphor goes? It's not a scientific metaphor. It's a poetic metaphor. But it has logic behind it. And I think those things can be very useful in the work you guys are doing. I really do. I think that's why you kind of... Looks like a what? Okay, yes, it could be a pipe organ, too, yeah. But pipe organ would be actually in another realm. Yeah, it does look like a pipe organ. This is woodwinds, because of the shape of all these rocks from Arizona, kind of like flutes and oboes and clarinets. Okay, now this is just a shot from, we modeled all of those drawings in 3D, and the texture maps are still done. We would unwrap the rocks, we would take the strings and get it from all these different, 45 degrees, 30, a 0. And then I would print those out and put tracing paper on my drawing board and do all of them by hand in pencil because I didn't want it to look like the tool. I didn't want it to look like Bryce, if any of you know Bryce. I wanted it to look like an artwork. And here is a little...
That was a tracing of a computer-generated image that you then traced.
It wasn't a computer-generated image. It was modeled in a 3D program by a person. The texture maps, I now do the modeling. At that time, I didn't know how. I've had to kind of learn all this computer stuff.
But there was an output from the computer that you then hand traced.
Yeah, then I would print out, unwrap the rocks, make them flat, put them on my drawing board, do the texture map, scan them back in, put the skin on. So there you are. This is the actual 3. There you are in woodwinds. And so this whole landscape is a metaphor for an orchestra. And what happens is, I'm going to show you a little film from a piece of music by a Calcutta-born composer who lived in Germany and Austria for many years, and he's actually now got an endowed chair at the Department of Music at UC Santa Barbara. His name is Clarence Barlow, and he's actually the first. That's a still shot of music all played out, but I'll show you a little film with the music. Now, the reason this is going up into a parabolic spiral is that his music, Barlow's music, is algorithmically composed based on a 2-dimensional spiral with arms coming out of it. So mathematically, the spiral is in the music, but you can't really hear it. He's the one who connected me to the phonetics department of Cologne, because Clarence would microtune his instruments, make them do vowel sounds. He made an orchestra say, "How about the money?" And so this piece, this is called Im Januar am Nil, Im January on the Nile. And this is a little movie with, you can see, I hope the sound's working. Played by real instruments, but composed on the computer. The sound isn't coming out of the speakers. Do I have it in the wrong spot? Am I in the wrong one? Oh, maybe just turn this up.
Let's turn up a little way.
Shoot. Is it working?
Should we start again?
Yeah, I'll start it again. We're going to be playing this in our Dome Theater soon, too. So, I'm going to make a version. Now, these are the strings here. They have the images. The original drawings are in the texture map and the color from this timbre system I showed you. And the squares, which are sitting, that's bass clarinet. These squares, which are straight up, with a little picture for vocals, and they have different colors which you can't see, which are the vowel sounds he's creating. They're not actually notes that are being played, but if we had a good sound system, you might, and you were really well trained in phonetics, you might be able to hear those vowels, but there they are as visual markers. Those pink ones are piano. Saxophone is there. Anybody who's close, look at my screen. It's better. Oh, you can't see it. I have it on the other. There you are looking at piano. That's beating objects. Here's strings. So all the music is in color, but the desert landscape is called the first organ stop. You know, in an organ, you pull a lever or a thing out, and you change the whole voice. So I will be doing more organ stops. The organ stop in the virtual color organ is not only the environment, but it's the vocabulary of the music, those two things. And that's why the pictures are out there. Now, as the music plays, it uses a MIDI function and it creates those polygons as it plays. If we were watching it real time, you would see them come out with the music. I just want you to see the credits because I hate to not give credit. Yeah?
The Nile is a really long river. Couldn't you have done something with the Nile and the banks and the mountains and things like that?
I suppose I could have, but I usually,
What you were trying to
yeah, when I start to do that, it's like probably, you know, I mean, it takes me years to produce each one of these things. So we played it in the organ stop that we had. Yeah, you're right. We could have done it from the Nile. Okay, now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Grid Jam project. The Grid Jam project is also taking place inside this organ stop, because that's what we have right now anyway. And the Grid Jam is going to be, it's composed by Alvin Kern. The players will be the Del Sol Quartet, so we'll have, you know, a string quartet, and we'll have Anthony Braxton on the saxophone, and we'll have Alvin playing disclavier, which is a computer, it's a grand piano with a computer MIDI keyboard. So you can load in other sounds and hit a key and play them. So Alvin's been collecting sounds like, well, there's a few of them here, but you know, we have John Cage speaking, or bison mating, or coins being tossed. And those things are all loaded in, and he plays them off the keyboard, and he also uses spectral shaping, which we will use by throwing these objects into movement. However, I couldn't just have a rectangular polygon coming out representing these things, because it wouldn't. So I've spent the last 4 years modeling all the sounds in Maya. And the way I do it, first of all, we took them and we took a Max MSP program and put them through and mitified them and got pitch, which is the yellow line, green, which is dynamics or velocity, loud and soft. And basically, I have modeled pitch is the front. It goes, you know, it does the exact pitch. And the dynamic changes, I go to the top of the model. Well, I'll show you that in a minute. The top of the model, and I scale it in and out. So if it's louder, it's wider. If it's softer, it's narrower. This is John Zorn. And I worked out the color. Before I did that, I made all of those charts, you know, I printed them out, and I sorted them into 8 groups by how they looked, not what they sounded like. I looked at these charts, and then each one was assigned one of my texture maps from the landscapes. The timbre is done through listening and hearing and using all of my systems, you know, depending upon instruments or how the sound is. Now this is it being modeled in the loudness, softness part. And here you can see it from the top. Now this one is going to be Cutler bass motor. So. And this one is a little brook sound. This one is coins being tossed. So you see it has a metallic material because of the metallic sound of the coins being. So I use materials, I use colors, all kinds, anything I can. And there's the top of it. This one has a very classy sound to it. It's a very long one. The whole thing won't come out unless you keep the key depressed. Imagine you're sitting in the middle of this desert that I showed you, and all of the players will be appearing thanks to Pierre Boulanger's lab at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. They will all be appearing in 3D with their instruments, sitting in the, and these objects will be coming out along with the other kinds of objects for the strings. There's a close-up. Too bad it looks awful. Okay, this one's going to be a very transparent sound. That comes from strings, so you can see the picture on there. Sometimes I put on 4 of them going this way, sometimes more going this way, sometimes mirrored together. Just any kind of variation I can make. This is an elephant. And that's just a picture I threw in from the film you saw. Yeah.
I think that we need to move to the next discussion topic, but
Oh, okay.
we should
Well, I have just these are objects in it, so that's it. I'm really at the end of my thing. So there you go. That's it.
I do have a question. I've done some work in 3D modeling for computer network attacks and computer network interactions. And one of the challenges we had was there was a lot of information that we were collecting that couldn't be represented solely visually, and if we tried, it's just overloaded.
We need to do sonification with, or musification.
Have you been approached at all by people that might have interest in applying audio metaphor to?
Well, actually, we do that here at the University of New Mexico, you know, in Tom Cardell's lab with Paniotis, who is, he's got his appointment through electrical engineering and also, I think, music, and he's working in the Viz lab, and he does musification. He's worked with doing, you know, when they're trying to, they have attacks on their computer system, instead of just watching or listening for blah, 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 he changes it into music. And they also, I didn't bring it with me, but they have, actually I probably have it in my computer, a beautiful visualization, musification of kidneys that they use here to, in 3D, they make medical students assemble it and make it run properly, and you can, we don't have time or I'd play it for you, but we're out. So sonification, perceptualization is very, 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 very important. And it's, to me, it's the same notion, and we have to use all of our senses. And, you know, it just goes on and on and on. But I think you really need to work with people who've been trained in these kinds of metaphors their entire lives, because we can bring a lot of richness to your problem solving. Other questions? Or am I getting that?
Just one last comment.
Yeah.
A lot of your displays look a lot like, I have worked with a team at the Naval Postgraduate School, or computer scientists that look at what they call battle rhythm management. It's the concerted effort by a number of people together, and they try to model it into a 3D map. And it looks a lot like yours in that they're layering activities onto each other. They were looking for collaboration points. That's my area of research. So where do they collaborate at some point? They were looking at different methods of collaboration? Do they get together meetings? Do they call each other? Do they send emails? Do they chat? And they found that the rhythm, what they found was the consistent rhythm, the beat, I guess, is chat, because they do a lot of chat between
There's
the
access grid too, that's a, you know.
It's very, so I was going to say, very much models what you've talked about metaphorically.
Yeah.
And so when they, because they work from a mathematical model just like you did, and it strikes me, the logic is really very similar. I was wondering, when you go out and you're talking about this, so because I'm not an artist and I'm definitely not a musician, do you get a lot of agreement among your peers, or is there a lot of discussion?
Music people love what I'm doing.
Okay.
I gave a lecture, I've given it to various phonetic departments, the one in Cologne, and I had to argue my position and got it through. And then I was doing it at the University of Grenoble, and they said, we do not like the sausage technique. Does that make sense to people, the sausage? Do you know what the sausage, that means? They were upset that in my collaging, if you look at my Ur sonata, you know, it goes from syllable to syllable, you'll have different collaging for different plosives and things. But I explained to them, I said, yeah, but the vowel goes over the whole thing, and if you have a diphthong, the vowel sound blends between colors, because you can do that really easily, either in the computer or in Paint, you can do that. So I only had the sausage technique from plosive to fricative, you know, which makes sense, but the vowels, they go over rather smoothly. So I always do, I like to talk to audiences. I take my disciplines very, very seriously.
I guess the underlying question I was asking is, in art, you're looking for individuality, and in sort of the sciences that we go into, the typical sciences,
I don't know if
we
that's...
look for commonality. We look
Yeah,
for,
see, I don't think the arts look for individuality. I think that's a very old notion of what the arts look for, sorry.
So do you look for some commonality
Yeah.
in agreement among your peers?
You know what? I used to apply for National Endowment for the Arts grants as a conceptual artist, but because I was painting, they walked me back into painting. And no painter would ever get what I'm doing. That kind of answers your question. I'm not, you know, I have an international career. I mean, I've shown in major museums and all that. But quite frankly, I don't consider myself part of that community. About 10 years ago, a German musicologist friend said, you know, Jack, I used to say I was doing a visual performance of music. I was reorchestrating it for the brush, I used to say. And Volker said, you know, you're not doing that. You're doing visualization of music. And that little sentence totally refocused my direction. And I realized that, I mean, I love working over at the VaIL Lab. I'm seventh heaven connected to high performance computing. My academic appointment here is through art and art history, but I'm never over there. I'm over with those guys. I am into visualization, using, you know, very strict analytical concepts, but drawing upon a very rich life of thinking metaphorically.
It comes very close to what Neil was talking about yesterday. I see a real similarity in the way you approach your work and the way you approach.
Well, you were trained as an artist. You have an...
It's about the structure of what you're trying to portray. So interesting enough, I don't know either one of your fields, but it's like there's a beginning, there's a growing synthesis of an approach to something. You do it from a visual story narrative line because you're trying to portray some information to people. You're doing it from a visual line as in painting.
Actually, I think of myself as a narrative too. I think of music as a narrative, you know. And then this chord turns into this, and then it does that, and then you have... It's a narrative.
And you don't have the same language to me, but you know, I'm presuming a lot. I just want to let you know.
Well, I didn't invent my system.
No,
I
no.
just am describing.
And you're
what I'm
structuring
trying
it for us. That's why it looks similar
Well,
to me.
right, but that's what all linguists do pretty much.
That's why it seems very similar in terms of the area. So I'm just surprised at how much it's a theme that goes through all of our talks today.
And it's research that turns me on. It's learning new things. So, you know, I don't take requests. Somebody said, oh, we want you, you know, we have a commission for you to do a certain Mozart piece. I'm sorry, I don't do that, because I put so many years into each thing that I do. You know, I mean, just drawing the eight drawings for the color organ, I mean, that was like a couple of years. So, because I insist on doing it like this, because it's still, you know, and I insist on having it come through my body, etc. So I'm a funny hybrid. But I love to learn new things, and I love research. And so I think I sort of connect up to people.
In the future, you know, many years from now, do you think that your work may be made accessible to people by allowing it to be applied in some automated fashion, some computing fashion to existing?
Well, you could, I would let people do that. I would let them take my systems and do that. It just wouldn't look the same. See, I always had this total fear of looking like everybody else's stuff, and Bryce, and like that. And I remember going to an Apple meeting, and this lady demonstrating software where you could take an image and then have it appear like Van Gogh had painted it. And she said, you know, up until 3 months ago, I wasn't an artist. And I said, madam, you still aren't. Perhaps the software engineer who wrote this is an artist, but you are not. So, I mean, you know, I just have, yeah, I would let these things be automated. Just, I'm still making artworks, and so it's my hand. I am a funny hybrid. I walk like a duck, and I quack like an elephant, so.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Online where you can see prettier pictures.
So I'd like to get everyone out of here in the next 20 minutes or so. I know we probably won't have time to talk about everything we want to, but I think that although we have some folks here that are experts in sign and gesture, that we can have that discussion at a later date. I would like to have kind of a broad and open discussion about putting together a repository for visual language, and maybe discussing some of this, you know, ideas about scope, like how broad do we want, you know, a repository for visual language to be? Do we want it just to encompass something like Unicode, which covers a lot of human language, but it's very skin deep? Do we talk about, you know, clip art as used within like Microsoft programs? Do we talk about iconography and symbols, or things that are used within visual language translators? What is the scope of something like that, and how do you make that accessible both to individuals that might want to just peruse or use icons within their own work, or for those individuals to take and build software that would then use libraries or sets of icons, or to allow this online repository to be used by researchers to leverage social networks, to leverage like the hundreds of thousands of people that might be interested in such a tool to be able to do experiments in cognition and perception, and who would like to collaborate. So those are the open questions, and so you know, we just want to talk about where we might want to host this and who might want to help sponsor it. I don't think it's something that the Navy or SPAWAR will directly fund, but as far as like something that we would benefit from, we would definitely put man hours as opposed to organizing and putting something like this together. And so we're really interested in partners for collaboration and your ideas and your vision for how something like this might work.
One of the things I'd like to add, Sonny, is that we take a real risk on Sonny calling you people up. First of all, I don't know many of you. I don't hardly know any of you. But what was interesting was Sonny put together a list of a very diverse group of people. You're obviously not in the same sciences. You're not in the same area of expertise. But you were, what I wanted to express was our appreciation that you tolerated a day and a half of a very ambiguous situation with very little structure and really no knowledge of where it would come out. That was one thing. I always believe that good science always comes out of that. And good science is the same as good art. It's about interdisciplinary and the interfaces between areas. So you provided that direction. I want to thank the Stillmans especially because you come out of a completely different area. You come out of the business community, but in a practical area. You provided us with a different view of that, and that was really helpful because it gives us a touchstone where practicality meets sort of the art and the science of it as well. My frustration for years, your company's not big enough to have its own large R&D area like Northrop Grumman or IBM, but they sort of pump out all the research as they're building a product. You don't have that, you could build your product. That gives me a sense of where this starts, because it's about the next generation of these tools. So I was very appreciative that you sit with us for this long and sit through a very wide-ranging discussion. And in fact, with Jack, because her area is so different from ours, this was obviously boring in places for you as well as interesting. So if you can help us define over the next year some of the areas of research that you'd like to see in your own scientific and artistic areas, we'd be willing to have that conversation. As Sunny says, we don't know where the money will come from. I just know that if you start with a group of people with some genuine sense of, we've got something interesting to say, something will come out of it. I always, and usually, by the way, this has been my history. It's not long, but it's 30 years. It takes a year to put anything. It just flat out takes a year. So I want to warn you that if you thought you were going to come out of here and you're going to get a grant next month and you're going to go on your way, it never ever works that way. It takes about a year. Our interest is we'll be getting back with various pieces of you and various people here to see, we have this idea. We'd like to grow it with you. We'd like to see if we can't move it forward a little bit. So don't be surprised if we call you back. Don't be surprised if we don't call you in a year. It'll just take long. But we will keep you in terms of our mailing list for conferences that we think are like this, that move this area forward. And if you know of an area, in fact, to not be presumptuous, if you know of some place where this is all being done and methodically so, we would like to be the first to know that we were very presumptuous in bringing you people together. We don't know that yet. So I want to thank you for that, because it's really hard to get a group of people together and actually sustain a conversation for a length of time. That happened. I got a little piece of everybody's intellect, and now I just percolate with it. My job is to bring it to Washington, D.C., which is where all the sources of funding are in my world, and say to them, this is an interesting area. One of them is to go back to the Army and talk to them about what you've been doing. To say, this is an interesting area. How does it relate to what Neil did? And where Neil is going in his career as an artist, and where he's going in graphic arts. I mean, there's a connection there that I think is very odd and very useful, as opposed to tying it with Jack's work in musical metaphor, which is what she's really doing for me, describing time. Time is a really interesting issue for the way you described it in art. It goes back to my area of research in battle rhythm management. How do I get 10,000 people doing coordinated things at the same time in a small amount of, a small window, with about 10 to 15 cultures all trying to coordinate their activities? It's just not that easy, and it's very difficult. And a lot of it's spent with your quick point sheets.
You should be using visualization for that.
And it's been very hard for the community to do. We spent a lot of time with a very inclusive group. We've never gone this far outside of our own. I mean, I can go to companies that are very big. They're like Northrop Grumman and General Dynamics. These are all companies. They're typical defense companies. I think their direction is actually winding down. It's just like any company. They sort of peak and then they start to go down as they have to transition into
It's like any art department.
Right, they go peak and they go,
Yeah.
this is, I think, a transition, which is what makes us so, if it feels uncomfortable, it's because we're doing the right thing.
I think you
So-
need to go to universities which have interdisciplinary programs where they can all work together on new problems.
Well, and that's why we're deciding that we would go this. It would be about academics, it would be about laboratories, it would be about groups like MITRE, as Dan is representing our lab, about small companies that have been doing this area, small areas and large areas, to see if we can't get something together. So I just want to communicate. Sunny's going to set up a place where you can place information if you like. You can touch stone back. We're going to try to grow this as a conference, maybe widen it a bit, or Emily and I talked about coordinating this with the statistics group that actually meets on an annual basis, that has a larger community, to co-locate to those communities, to co-locate to another maybe more artistic conferencing area. So we'll just be talking to you. So keep that in mind when you walk away from here. I'm hoping that we can, as I said, grow this community and start to see if we can't grow, most importantly, graduate students in this area. So this is my motherhood and apple pie speech. We have a serious lack of ingenuity in the United States today, because most of our kids have come out of very dry environments in the academic area as well as the artistic community. Because business has grown in the way it has. The web has shifted. It went from web to web 2.0. You've seen a big shift now. We don't have students that have been studying web 2.0 for 20 years. They come in and do the right thing. We've got very young people who are coming in that want to do something but have no guidance. So you're going to be that guidance. You're going to be people who hire them in your companies, who are going to hire them in your graduate school. Would you give them a slightly broader perspective? Because the stovepipe expertise in most departments is going away as sciences are combining. So, meaning, for Jack, I have scientists who know physics, I have scientists who know engineering, I have scientists that know art. Very few, obviously, but I don't have them sitting in the same room together trying to develop a product together. Very seldom do they all come together anymore because there's been mileage in becoming an expert in the stovepipe science.
Wow, it's the opposite direction that I thought.
It's, well, in the business world and in my world, it's become very stovepipe. So what we're trying to do is grow the next generation of kids who come out of these gaming industries so that they talk to people like you on a regular basis, people that are
Yeah, we have a
alive.
strong gaming
Yeah, so,
component.
and it's coming along, so that's what I'm just trying to encourage that. Dan, I'm sorry.
I sort of noticed something on the opposite end of that. Gaming and game writing is not what it used to be.
It's not.
You have engines that do a lot of the hardcore technical stuff for you, so the gamers essentially are artists and plot writers.
Yes.
But if you ask them to write Pong from scratch, they belly up. They have no idea how to get down the metal note. All that old know-how is disappearing. And it's in the tinkering community, but it's no longer, something that, your average CS student picks up.
Well, and the biggest struggle for us is the people that are good at developing don't care about the science of it, developing a theory so that they can guide those behind them. They're busily creating.
Right.
So our job is to sort of encourage the scientists to come behind them and say, now we want to build a theoretical model of what you're doing so other people can figure out how to do it and then push it forward.
Yeah, engineers sort of forge a solution, and then the scientists have to know why.
Yeah. And so that mixes what's in this room. And so it's a hard area for us, but that's our direction and our overall philosophy, and that's the reason we have the young people running the area in my research area. They're all very young people. This is their first big conference. Thank you for being so tolerant of that. But their job is to grow this area as a research area and a recognizable and enterprise for the rest of the community. Say, we will fund that because we can see products that are potentially coming out of that. So that's where we're growing this as we go. So it's a long way to say thank you for sitting through the longer conversation. We will be trying to put together another conference next year. We just don't know where the venue is and what we can afford to put together as well. We want to find if we can leverage other communities like Dr. Chang's as well as others to see if we can't grow some of this area. And that's where Sonny's going to be sort of the nexus. He's going to start this as his research program. He's a graduate student here as well as a laboratory employee. His job, though, is to focus on science and worry less about the application. It still has to be sort of DoD related, but it's a wide application with most of our activities these days and in worldwide policing actions, humanitarian assistance, and actually community outreach. That's a lot of what we do nowadays. It just sort of disappeared when you were reading the headlines, but what do I do to community? How do I support that community? Yeah.
So how much are you supporting peer research?
Go ahead. I'm
How
sorry?
much are you supporting peer research?
At this point, in terms of dollar amounts,
Yes.
Dollar amounts, goodwill, all of that
I
stuff.
have to tell you, it's 50% of my time. And so what happens with 50% of my time is I spend time looking at the technology, but I don't get paid by that. They don't pay me because I'm too senior now. I get paid by policy people. I write policy for the DoD on uses of collaboration commercial software. Because that's who pays my salary, because that's who's willing to sort of take on a senior person. So the science of it is much less of where we spend time. We're looking for areas to fund the research, and so we think that there's a possibility of growing it. Let me give you my experience, because first of all, you can quote me and I can be dead wrong, but the typical projects that we run in the DoD are normally for seed, it's normally $100,000 a year for about 2 people to do something interesting. It's normally $300,000 for a team of 3 to 5 that do something per year. It's usually 1 to 3 years, depending on how fully mature your research is. So that's the world we live in. It's not millions of dollars. You're not going to get a $500,000 grant. It just doesn't happen in my world because S&T is so small. But it's seed money. The other area we've been sort of toying with is how do you build it? How do you build the S&T community to leverage a lot of SBIRs? These are small business innovative research. Small business innovative research. It's a very peculiar function within the military. They put out calls for topics, and then small companies, less than 100 people, can apply.
Well, STTOs are really good.
Oh, that's right. That's your area, right?
Yeah,
Well,
but it's a good deal.
But
Government funds you, and you maintain the intellectual property. So for small business,
Well, it's
government
for small
funds you,
business.
you maintain the IP. And so it's a good deal for everybody.
Right. I mean, there's little venues like that, but I'm not the best person to describe this. So if you have a question, I'll be happy to put you in touch with people who have those kinds of expertise. My area of research is mostly about working with scientists in my lab and having them outreach and collaborate with universities on projects and giving the university a grant to work with them on that project. So, we would work with Sunny to build a grant to work with another university or a business to build something. That's the kind of work we do at this level. So I don't know, Dan, did that answer your question, or is it that way too convoluted?
No, it was good.
Okay, so I just want to give you a feel for that work. As I said, this is the first time we've interacted with the DoD. It's a large organization.
Because there's been a sea change in, for example, in DARPA. DARPA used to fund a lot more pure research, pie in the sky material, and now they're driven by application.
Right. It has to apply, and it has to transition.
Yeah, there's got to be a programmatic end.
And we've seen that whole sea change in DoD altogether.
Yeah.
There's a small enclave of scientists who are really focused on seeing if they can't grow the science.
Yeah.
And that would be different from transition. For us, the word transition means you have to be able to make it mature enough that it will you can turn it over to a company and manufacture 1,000 of these widgets very quickly. They have to maintain a lot of standards and all that other stuff. That's the world he's talking about, because that's where a lot of the attention. When Congress goes back and says, what have you done with your money? We have to defend ourselves and say, oh yeah, these people in the military are using it, so therefore it's useful. You can't say I'm looking at, I can't even think of anything, but something that's very artistically esoteric, because nobody wants to look at that. But there's a small enclave starting to grow in there, and I think you're going to see a buildup of it over the next 5 years. Because, as I said, overall in the U.S., you're seeing a real dearth of innovative research at the graduate student level, moving something forward, and really, I think there's been a sea change in our direction, wanting to focus on those guys. So that's just a general.
Do you think Washington wants to put more money out there for?
There's no money to put out there right now because we're in the middle of a war effort. And if you think you're suffering, try being on the inside. I used to have a very robust research program in the late 1990s. That's all dried up since we've all gone to war, because that goes somewhere. So I'm as bitter as everybody else. On the other hand, eventually that scales back and money starts to flow back in again. And it means it moves out of the community. You can't keep it internally. It's got to go somewhere and it's got to produce something. So I don't know. I certainly can't predict politics, and I'm not a politician. I don't want to be too cavalier about my opinions. I just know that there's little pots of money here and there. It sustains people, and a good idea, at least if it gets some light, will grow. And we're willing to tolerate a wide range of people who have very different backgrounds to see if something won't grow. So that's sort of a long story. And I didn't mean to dominate the conversation. I just want to let you know how much it's appreciated that you've been here, and how much Sunny and Emily have gotten out of it, and actually the entire team have been exposed to things they just never would have been exposed to before. And that's important to me as a mentor to young people who are trying to grow their science. So, Sunny, I'll turn it back to you now that I've gone on.
Well, if anybody has any other particular topics or ideas, right now, we should bring them up before we close the conference. And I'd also, like to, ask you all to take a look at the discussion forum. If you know of other conferences that are ongoing that are related, please post them. We'd like to just kind of start generating, kind of a little nexus of areas and of knowledge and of relationships.
So, relevant to data glove. So, the ICMI conference is probably useful. It's the International Conference of Multimodal Interfaces. And the idea that it's exactly that. It's work with more than one interface to give you information. And it's usually text plus something else. And they have, a lot of the folks there have done things that you'd be interested in, like maps with iconified gestures on the map to say information about troop movement, something like that. So that's a pretty good conference for science.
Fancy mashup.
What's that?
Fancy mashup.
Sorry?
It's a fancy mashup.
Mashup, yeah. So those are the folks who did that were the Phil Cohen at Oregon Graduate Institute. And there were some other folks who, and the other thing I was thinking about for you guys is that as gesture recognition from video gets better, then that actually may help with the input to the system as well. So, I mean, if you could talk to the system and gesture with the system to help disambiguate, and that turns that into.
That's very good. In fact, it draws to mind some research I did in the early 2000s. There's a tool that you've seen. It's called a whiteboard. Right? There's a lot of them out there. But in 1993, when we were asking for the technology growth of whiteboards, it turned out that there was only one person writing about it at the University of it was Edmonton. What was interesting about that research was, think about, and I don't know if Jack will relate to this, but in the history of art, you've always had collaborative art, so that in my area, collaboration. So in collaborative art, people draw pictures together, but what happens with artists is you have to parse out the picture in order for them to draw together. In computers, what it allowed for was 15 artists on the same pixel at the same time. And nobody knows where that's going to take us. We've never been here before in the history of, first of all, the history of human expression. And so I wanted to throw that out as well, because it's been a side interest to us, but it talks to the same area of growing a technology area. Whiteboards are now just things that they use in business for drawing, writing out your goals, and then everybody brainstorms and all that. And that's about as far as the whole technology's gone. It sits there, and I truly believe it's the beginning of something very different. So think about what it would be like to have 15 artists on the same pixel at the same time.
I've seen whiteboard used differently at the University of Loughborough.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was actually, these people are now at the Technical University of Sydney. It was creativity and cognition,
Oh, okay.
Blue Ridge Research Center. I was a visiting fellow there.
Oh,
They
we'd
were-
like to get the reference for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's been, you see some of that, we don't know where the research has gone in terms of that, so I don't know
Yeah,
what
and
artists
so they
have
were,
gone.
they were using it as, they were making whiteboard drawings that would, you bring it to a certain point, and you bring it to another, it's like they were using it in all kinds of ways.
For us, it would be about representing planning and coordination of activities among hundreds and thousands of people. So that's why it's an interesting area. So we'll take art as a starting point and then apply it to our area.
This was a computer science department, but Ernest Edmonds was, he's a computer scientist, but he's also into doing art. And their creativity and cognition conference, which has always happened in England, this year happened in Washington, I was there doing,
Okay. That's good to know. Thank you.
so look
Okay,
them
so
up.
keep that as well. That's just another data point to all the people in the back of your head. Okay, Sunny, I think we're wrapping this up, so I would like to invite you to communicate with us through email and through phone calls, and then, as I said, we will keep track of you. We will tell you whether there is a follow-on conference or not, because you just have to sit through this one so that you at least know what happened. I'd like to give closure to people so they have a sense of where it went. And we'll try, what we're going to do is write a small summary report about this, and so you'll get a sense of what we gained from it, and we'll pass that back out to you, so you have a sense of what happened to all this. And that way you can also keep track of it for your own records, where we want to go.
How was from San Diego?
We're thinking about it. There's always that Comic-Con connection, I'm telling you, if I can get, a little room in the organization.
Or like a
and
nice bed
convention
and breakfast and